The dining room was glowing with warm light, but the air was anything but warm. Golden chandeliers reflected off the polished wood table, where plates of roast beef and mashed potatoes sat untouched. At the head of the table sat Helen Ward, 72, her silver hair pinned neatly, her hands folded calmly on her lap. To anyone else, it looked like a family gathering. To Helen, it felt like a trial. Her eldest son slid a crisp stack of papers across the table. The sound of the folder against the wood was louder than any thunder. "Mom," he said, his tone sharp but practiced. "You've done enough. It's time we take over. Just sign here." Helen's daughter leaned in, her smile brittle, her voice dripping with condescension. The Ward legacy should move forward without old ways. The younger grandchildren sat in silence, watching the performance, their eyes flicking between grandmother and their ambitious parents. Helen reached for her spoon. Her fingers tightened around the handle until her knuckles went white. She didn't speak, not a word, but her silence echoed louder than any protest. The very legacy they were trying to erase sat right there at the head of the table, unshaken. Forks scraped against porcelain, but no one was eating. One by one, her children began circling their words around her like vultures. "Mom," the second son said with a shrug, "you've always been too old-fashioned. You don't understand branding, online markets, expansion. That's our field now." The eldest daughter adjusted her pearl necklace, her tone almost pitying. "Honestly, the workshop only survived because of us. Without the younger generation pushing it forward, it would have stayed a tiny village shop." A thin laugh spread around the table. Each sentence landed like a blade. Helen sat still, her back straight, her face unreadable, but inside, each word cut deeper. To them, she wasn't the woman who had carved the first wooden toy with her bare hands, or the widow who had turned grief into a thriving business. No. In their eyes tonight, she was just a shadow, an old relic occupying the seat of honor but stripped of honor itself. Her spoon trembled slightly in her grip. The chandelier's glow blurred in her eyes, but she didn't blink, didn't let the tears fall. Silence was her shield, and she wore it well. The chatter grew louder, her children congratulating themselves, planning futures that erased her name entirely. Helen listened, each word a hammer driving nails into a coffin, her own as they imagined it. And yet she did not break. She simply sat, a storm contained, the kind of silence that no one recognized as power. Not yet. The voices around the dinner table faded, replaced by another sound, the echo of a hammer against wood years ago. Helen was 28 then, standing in a freezing shed behind the house. Her husband's chair was empty, a black suit still hanging in the closet after the funeral. Bills piled high on the counter. 2 children asleep in the next room, dreaming of a father who would never return. Her hands, young, blistered, clutched a block of oak. She carved through the night, the blade slipping once, cutting her skin. Blood stained the wood, but she didn't stop. She sanded, polished, and the first toy soldier came to life under her trembling fingers. At dawn, she carried a basket of handmade toys to the village market. People laughed at the widow trying to sell carvings. But one woman bought a piece, then another. Soon, customers returned, not for pity, but for the craftsmanship. She remembered the day she hung a sign over the small workshop, Ward Woodworks. Her children's initials carved on the back, a promise that this legacy would keep them alive. For decades, Helen worked through winters that froze her bones and summers that blistered her skin. She carved not just toys and furniture. She carved survival, dignity, and a future. And now, at 72, sitting at the head of a glittering dinner table, she watched those very children dismiss her life's work as old-fashioned. The memory burned in her chest. She tightened her grip on the spoon, not out of weakness, but to keep from letting the fire inside her spill out too soon. Helen's silence at the table wasn't surrender. It was calculation. For years, she had felt this day coming, the day her own children would see her not as the root but as an obstacle. And so, quietly, she had prepared. A memory flickered. Not of wood and sawdust this time, but of a polished law office in town. She had walked in wearing her Sunday coat, a small wooden box clutched in her hands. Inside, deeds, contracts, and the first receipts of the workshop she had built with blood and calluses. The lawyer, a young man with sharp glasses, had looked at her with surprise. "Mrs. Ward, are you certain? Most people leave their businesses to their children." Helen's lips curved into a calm, knowing smile. Not all children are ready to carry a legacy. Sometimes it must skip a branch to save the tree. And in that sealed document, witnessed and notarized, she wrote it clear. The workshop, the land, the Ward name itself would pass not to her ambitious sons and daughters, but to her youngest granddaughter, the only one who had ever sat with her at the bench, sanding wood, listening, learning. The girl who asked, "Grandma, can you show me how to carve the wings on this bird?" The one who didn't see Helen as old-fashioned, but as timeless. No one else knew of this, not her children, not even the granddaughter herself. The papers sat locked in the lawyer's vault, waiting like a storm on the horizon. At the dinner table, her children raised their voices, already planning who would take which share. Helen simply lifted her teacup, her silence sharper than a blade, because she knew. When the time came, it wouldn't be her voice that spoke. It would be the will. The family meeting was staged like a coronation. Her eldest son tapped his glass, clearing his throat as if he were already chairman of a board. "From this day forward," he announced, puffing his chest, "the Ward legacy will be managed by us, the next generation. Mother has stepped aside, and we will make sure her name is honored in memory." Polite claps, smug smiles. One daughter even raised a toast. To new beginnings. Helen remained seated, her eyes steady. The silence stretched until finally she reached into her bag. Her fingers brushed against an envelope, thick and sealed with the lawyer's mark. "If you believe I have no say," she said softly, her voice slicing through the room like a blade, "then let this speak for me." The lawyer, standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. All eyes turned, confusion etched across faces that had just been celebrating. He broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper was louder than the clinking glasses. He cleared his throat and began to read. The words fell like stones into water. "By my final will and testament, I, Helen Ward, hereby leave full ownership of Ward Woodworks, including land, property, and trademarks, too." The eldest son leaned in, already smiling, ready to hear his name. The daughter's hand hovered above her glass, confident. "To my granddaughter, Emily Ward." Silence, not the comfortable kind, but the kind that freezes the blood. The glass slipped from the daughter's hand, shattering against the floor. No one moved. No one breathed. The lawyer continued, calm, professional. "She has been named the sole inheritor, with no contestation permitted. This document has been notarized and upheld under Pennsylvania law." The room fell into stunned stillness. Their smug certainty evaporated in an instant. Helen rose slowly from her chair. Her gaze swept over her children, faces pale, mouths open, eyes burning with disbelief. She didn't need to gloat. Her silence was the gavel. The silence shattered, not by Helen, but by her children. "What is this?" The eldest son roared, face red with rage. "You went behind our backs. You betrayed your own blood." The daughter's voice rose, shrill and furious. "How could you hand our company to a child? After everything we've done, after all we built?" Helen turned slowly, her gaze calm as the storm that follows lightning. Her voice was steady, low, but carried through every corner of the room. "You speak of building, yet you forget who laid the first stone." Her son slammed his fist on the table. "You think this is fair?" Helen's lips curved into the faintest, unshakable smile. "Fair, you wanted to erase me from my own legacy. But I am the root of this family, and roots do not ask permission to exist." The room went silent again, this time heavier than before. One child opened their mouth, but no words came. Another tried to glare, but their eyes dropped under Helen's steady gaze. The lawyer closed the folder with a quiet snap. The sound was final, undeniable. No one could argue. No one dared. Helen had spoken, and in that moment she was not just a mother. She was the founder, the keeper of their name, and they knew it. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Her children's angry shouts overlapped, accusations, demands, pleas, but all of it fell against the unbreakable wall of the will. The lawyer repeated, firm, unshaken. All assets, rights, and the Ward trademark pass solely to Emily Ward, effective immediately. This decision is final and binding. Emily, the youngest granddaughter, sat frozen in her chair. Her wide eyes darted to her grandmother, confusion and awe spilling across her face. "Grandma, you mean me?" she whispered. Helen's weathered hand reached across the table, resting gently over Emily's trembling fingers. "Yes, my dear. It was always meant for the one who truly carried the spirit, not just the name." News spread quickly through the family, then the town. Neighbors shook their heads at the betrayal Helen had endured, but their voices carried respect, even reverence. "She's the true heart of Ward Woodworks." They tried to erase her, but she outsmarted them all. For the first time in years, the workshop doors opened not with dust and indifference, but with hope. Emily walked beside her grandmother, her hands already learning the weight of the tools, her mind soaking up every story carved into the grain of wood. Helen didn't gloat, didn't boast. She simply returned to her bench, the smell of oak and varnish wrapping around her like an old friend. Her children, stripped of power, could only watch from the outside. They had tried to inherit a crown. Instead, they found themselves exiled from the very kingdom they had dismissed. And Helen, she was not vengeful, she was fulfilled. The legacy was safe. The sun dipped low over Pennsylvania, its golden rays streaming through the high windows of the old workshop. Dust danced in the light, glowing like fragments of memory. Helen sat at her bench, her silver hair shimmering under the last light of day. Beside her, Emily stood, young, steady, her eyes alight with determination. In Helen's hands was a block of oak. Her fingers, wrinkled and scarred, guided the chisel with slow precision. Emily's smaller, steady hands pressed alongside hers. Together they carved a single word into the wood. Ward. The letters were bold, deep, unshakable. One generation's strength meeting the next generation's promise. Helen looked at her granddaughter and smiled, a rare smile. Not of victory, but of peace. For the first time in years, she knew the legacy would not be stolen, twisted, or forgotten. Her voice, calm and certain, echoed softly as if narrating the moment. At the dinner table, they tried to erase my life's work. I answered with silence and a will they never saw coming. The camera lingered on the carved letters, then slowly pulled back, showing two hands, one aged, one young, holding the chisel together, etching a name that would outlive them both. Fade to black.